When they first assigned me that cell, it didn't seem all that bad compared to the holding tank I'd been stuck in for a week. The block was quiet most days, and the cell was small but not cramped. 2 bunks, a steel sink bolted to the wall, a crusted toilet in the corner, and just enough room to pace 3 steps back and forth if you angled your feet right. The guy I was bunked with back then, Charlie, or maybe Clarence, something with a C, was counting down his last month. He was older, not much of a talker, but respectful, the kind of inmate who didn't stir anything because he'd already seen it all before. We'd split the air in silence most nights, never got close, but in a place like that, silence can almost feel like friendship. He left on a Thursday. I remember because that night I had the bunk to myself for the first time, and I lay awake for hours listening to the empty spring of the mattress above me groaning every time the building creaked. There's something unnatural about an empty top bunk. Feels like someone's always supposed to be up there, like you're being watched by a person who just hasn't arrived yet. For 2 nights, I was alone. Then, just after 5 in the evening, they brought in a man I'd never seen before. They walked him down slow, not the usual shuffle. This guy moved like every step took effort, like his body wasn't quite convinced it should still be upright. He wasn't tall, but he looked stretched, skin clinging to bone, neck too thin for his shoulders. His face sagged in places where it shouldn't, like someone had melted parts of it and let it set again. He said nothing as they opened the door. Just stepped inside and sat on the bottom bunk without a glance in my direction. His jumpsuit looked new, creased at the seams, the kind they give you fresh from intake. No pen marks, no blood stains, no history yet. He didn't even claim the bed, just sat there, elbows on knees, staring at the floor like he was waiting for it to open. That cell, man, there's no privacy in a place like that. The light from the hallway sneaks through the narrow window in the door, just enough to paint shadows across your sheets. The toilet smells like rust, and the vent above the door rattles every time someone slams a gate on the block. At night, it sounds like something crawling through the walls. The next day, around lunchtime, we sat across from each other on the edge of the bunks. They slid the food trays through the slot, some rice thing, a half-soggy cookie, and mystery meat with too much gravy. I didn't think he'd eat. He didn't seem like he'd eaten in a while. But to my surprise, he picked up his fork slowly, took a few bites, and then, very deliberately, slid the edge of the tray under his shirt. One smooth motion, like he'd done it before. He didn't look up, didn't glance to see if I noticed, but I did. I watched him press the tray flat against his stomach and then adjust his jumpsuit like he was scratching an itch. The whole thing took maybe 5 seconds. He acted like nothing had happened. I thought about saying something, but I didn't. You learn quick in there that curiosity is a dangerous habit. People hide things all the time. Razors, pills, letters, pieces of string for God knows what. You mind your own business unless you're looking to start some trouble that doesn't end in your favor. So I looked away, ate my food, went back to my book. Whatever he was doing, I figured it wasn't mine to stop. That night, I woke up needing to piss. I slid off the top bunk quietly, not wanting to wake him. The air felt heavier than usual, thick, damp in a way I couldn't place. I stepped down on something warm, slippery. I nearly lost my footing. I reached out in the dark to steady myself, bracing my hand on the floor, and felt the stickiness before I saw it. My palm came away wet. I stepped back toward the door where the hallway light cut in just enough to see what I'd touched. It was blood. Dark, slow-moving, still warm. He was lying beside his bunk, curled slightly on his side, one arm tucked beneath him, the other stretched toward the wall like he'd tried to catch something that wasn't there. His neck, Jesus, his neck was carved open, like a zipper torn the wrong way. The broken edge of a plastic tray, sharpened, jagged, lay inches from his fingers, soaked and bent inward like he'd gripped it tight until the very last second. I just stood there, watching. Couldn't move, couldn't speak. I don't know how long I stared before I called out. I remember banging on the door until my knuckles stung,
But the officers didn't come right away. They always think you're exaggerating in there, figured it was a fight or a trick to get out of the cell. When they finally opened the door and saw what I was standing in, they dragged me out first, shouting, restraining, thinking maybe I had something to do with it. Threw me in the shower, hosed me off, and stuck me in a holding cell while they sorted out what happened. Later, they called it a suicide, said he must have snapped the tray during chow, smuggled it in, and spent hours sharpening it on the metal leg of the bunk. Said he planned it. But that's the part I can't stop thinking about. He did it while I was asleep, inches away. He slit his own throat and laid there in the dark, just bleeding and breathing and fading out like the lights in a dying hallway. And he never made a sound. I think about that sometimes, how much pain he must have been in to keep cutting even after the first slice. That kind of silence doesn't come from strength. It comes from something deeper, something hollowed out. That's the thing that sticks with me the most. Not the blood, not the mess, not even the way they looked at me after. It's knowing that he chose to die like that, right there beside me. And I never even asked him why.
I was 19 when I got locked up at Riverbend Correctional Facility in Georgia. Not for anything particularly wild, at least not in my mind at the time. Just a dumb decision that spiraled further than I ever imagined. I'd been selling weed on and off around the west side of Macon, and one night I made the mistake of selling to a high school senior, 17, just a few months shy of legal adulthood. Didn't know he was that young. Didn't even think to ask. He looked older than me. But none of that mattered once the cops caught him with it, and he gave up my name within the first hour. They hit me with distribution to a minor, and Georgia doesn't take that lightly. My public defender promised 2 years if I pled out. I ended up doing 18 months in Riverbend. That place changed the way I think about people, what they're capable of, what they hide in plain sight. About 9 months into my sentence, I had a cellmate transferred out to protective custody after some incident in the yard. 2 days later, they moved in a guy named Wallace. No one called him that, though. People just muttered, "That weirdo from F Block," whenever his name came up. I didn't know much about him at first, other than the fact that he'd been shifted around more times than most inmates do in an entire bid. Not for violence, not for snitching, just because no one could stand him. Not the inmates, not the COs, not even the nurses. He didn't say much when he showed up, just dumped his mattress roll on the bottom bunk and stood there, staring at the wall like he'd seen something behind it. I'd been planning to claim that bunk myself once it opened up, but I wasn't about to fight over it with a guy who looked like that. He had a massive black tattoo that covered the entire right side of his face and bled halfway across his shaved head. Not just a pattern or some prison ink scribble. It was a full image, some twisted blend of teeth and eyes and spirals. The kind of thing you couldn't stop looking at once you saw it, like it was pulling your gaze whether you wanted it to or not. Rumor was Wallace was in for arson and false imprisonment, set fire to a trailer with his own brother still inside. They said the brother lived, barely, and Wallace, he got 17 years. But what made people nervous wasn't the crime, it was how he acted after. He'd been through at least 7 cells in the last 6 months. Nobody wanted to bunk with him. The COs kept shuffling him around because they couldn't find a pod where he wouldn't cause problems, but they also didn't want him in solitary long term. Too much paperwork. The first night he sat up humming for hours. Not music, not even a tune, just this low, uneven sound like someone tuning a broken radio. It bounced off the walls and somehow crawled under your skin. He didn't stop until morning. That should have been my warning. By the second day, he started farting loud, deliberate ones, not just accidental slips. He would lift his leg, stare straight at the door, and rip one like he was performing for an audience. Then he'd laugh to himself in this slow, choked-up way. Not manic, not silly, just wrong, like he was proud of it. Sometimes he'd stand directly in front of the CO window and start dry heaving, even when nothing came out. One time, he actually vomited under his own bed, not from food poisoning or anything. He chose to. Just crouched down, pushed his fingers to the back of his throat, and left a pile of sour sludge beneath his own bed, like he was feeding some invisible thing that lived under there. I didn't sleep much. I didn't talk to him either. Not because I was scared. I just didn't want him to think we were on speaking terms. You could feel how off he was, like his thoughts came in a different sequence than everyone else's. He told someone during rec that he didn't want to leave prison, said it found it peaceful, said it made more sense than the world outside, said people out there looked at him funny. In here, he said, everyone already expected him to be broken. On day 4, he sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the toilet for over 2 hours, just staring. Didn't move, didn't blink. I'd flush it every now and then just to break the silence, and he'd laugh like it was some private joke. They sent him for a psych eval that afternoon. When he came back, he looked annoyed. "Said I'm fine," he muttered, laying back on the bunk. "Guess that means I'm not crazy." That night, I stayed awake as long as I could, just listening to him breathe. I remember thinking, this guy's not dumb. He knows exactly what he's doing. He just enjoys being unwanted, like he's testing how much of himself he can peel away before someone finally snaps. I went to the COs the next morning and asked for a transfer, said I'd bunk with anyone else, didn't matter who, didn't matter the block. But they told me he was already being moved again. Management is tired of his shit. I don't know exactly what triggered it. Maybe one of the COs got tired of the constant antics, or maybe someone higher up finally decided they'd had enough of him. But I remember the night they came for him. 3 officers. They don't look like they're here for words. Just opened the door, told him to stand, and let him out like it was just another cell shuffle. They didn't cuff him. Didn't even pretend to follow protocol, and the look on Wallace's face, that unreadable half-smile, didn't change one bit. He just walked out barefoot, eyes fixed on something far beyond the hallway. The next morning, word spread through the pod. He was dead. They said he'd been found in a holding cell on the other side of the wing, slumped in the corner with bruising so severe they didn't need an autopsy to know what happened. But nobody believed that. We all knew. The COs called it a suicide, but everyone knew it was murder. Inmates whispered about it for a while, but no one said much out loud, not because they were scared, but because there was this unspoken understanding. Wallace wasn't like the rest of us. He'd lived in that place like it belonged there, like it had been built around him, and maybe in some twisted way it had. He didn't get transferred. He didn't get better. Because the thing about someone like Wallace is, the only thing more dangerous than keeping them locked up is giving them nowhere else to go.
I'd only been in for 2 months, barely finding my rhythm, still learning which corners to avoid and how to hold my face when someone stared too long. I didn't talk much, didn't fight, mostly kept to myself and waited out the clock. 8 months, that's what they gave me. 8 months for getting caught up in something I should have known better than to be near. My lawyer said I was lucky. At the time, I believed him. The prison was down in southern Illinois, boxed in by fields and chain-link fences taller than some apartment buildings. It was one of those high-security facilities built like a warehouse for forgotten man. They called it Shawbridge, though nobody really said the name. We just called it the yard, the block, or that place, like we were talking about a haunted house no one wanted to admit they lived in. I was in E block, which meant I had to walk farther to get to the rec yard than most. That morning felt like any other, slow, gray, and quiet, the kind of quiet that creeps under your skin. You could hear everything, the echo of boots against concrete, the clink of gates being unlatched, the sharp thunk of steel doors locking behind you. We moved in a line, always in a line, single file with 2 guards walking alongside us,
One in front, one behind. No talking, no slowing down. Just walk, breathe, and don't stare too long at anyone ahead of you. I was maybe 10 or 11 bodies deep in that line. The guy in front of me was this wiry kid from Decatur, barely 20, all bones and sharp elbows. The guy in front him, different story. Bigger, older, the kind of person who never looked behind him, never flinched when someone passed too close. I didn't know his name. Nobody said it. But he had those dead, silent eyes, like someone who already knew how he was going to die and made peace with it. I remember it clearly, though sometimes I wish I didn't. We were maybe 40 feet from the gate that led out to the yard. That's when it happened. Fast, silent, no warning. The big guy stumbled, just one step. His hands reached for the air like he was trying to grab onto something invisible. Then he dropped to his knees. No sound, no shout, no scream, just the sick, wet cough of blood filling his throat. That's when I saw it. The man behind him, another inmate I hadn't even noticed before, stood calmly with one hand still raised. In his fist, a metal rod. It wasn't a knife. It was a sharpened steel shank, maybe 8 inches long, smooth and silver. He must have shaped it from bed frame piping or a vent grill. These guys were craftsmen when it came to violence. The rod was embedded so deep in the other man's back that I almost didn't see it at first, just the end of it glinting under the fluorescent light. Then the blood came, out of his mouth like a faucet left running. It poured out, thick and red, splashing onto his jumpsuit, pooling around his knees. I stood there, breath caught in my throat. I didn't move. None of us did. We were trained not to. Because here's the truth no one outside ever tells you. When something like that happens, you don't react, not if you want to stay alive. You don't scream, you don't run, you don't say a damn thing. You just keep walking like nothing happened, like the man bleeding out in front of you isn't real. And that's exactly what we did. The guards didn't notice at first. They were arguing over something behind us, probably someone's shoelaces or a late movement card. By the time they caught on, the man with the rod had already stepped back into line, wiped his hand against his shirt, and dropped the weapon at his feet like it was nothing. I remember stepping over the body. My foot slipped slightly on the blood, and I felt a warm spray hit my ankle. But I didn't stop. I didn't even look down. Just like everyone else, I walked around him, pretending my heart wasn't hammering like it was trying to crack my ribs open. Later, they locked us down for 48 hours. Strip searches, interrogations, block sweeps. They questioned everyone, but nobody said a word. The shank had no fingerprints. The cameras weren't working that morning. The man who did it got moved to another unit, and just like that, it was over. They wrapped the body in a tarp and hosed the floor like it was a broken pipe and not a person. And us? We went back to our cells, back to our routines, like it hadn't happened. But I remember that walk. I remember how the blood looked when it hit the floor, like ink blooming in water. I remember the sound of it, the absence of panic, the stillness. That was the day I stopped believing in rules, or safety, or order. That was the day I understood that prison doesn't teach you how to be a better man. It teaches you how to keep walking with a straight face while the man in front of you dies.
I'd been in for about 16 months when it happened, long enough to know which faces to avoid and which silences carried weight, long enough for the walls to stop feeling foreign, but not long enough to forget who I'd been before. By that point, I'd learned how to disappear in plain sight. You find a rhythm. Keep your head at the right tilt, never too high, never too low. You keep your hands visible, your eyes busy, and your mouth quiet, especially when it comes to anything involving contraband, phones, drops, lines of communication that weren't supposed to exist. Most of the time, I managed to fly just below the radar. I worked in the kitchen, scrubbed trays in the back with a guy they called Sleeper because he never spoke above a whisper. I shared a cell with an older dude named Mateo. He was quiet but sharp, with a way of folding his blanket so tight it looked stitched. He'd been locked up more years than I'd been alive, but he never bragged about it. He just watched, remembered everything. He got transferred out without much warning, moved to a medical unit after a bad infection in his foot. That was the last I saw of him. The next morning, his bunk sat empty, and the cell felt like someone had sucked all the air out of it. 2 days passed. Then came the shift. It started during evening count. I was leaning against the far wall, trying not to listen to the arguing 2 cells down, when I noticed a few heads turning, first one, then another. Not the usual kind of glance either. These were deliberate, long, as if they were trying to burn a hole through my skull just by staring. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. You get like that in here. But as the minutes dragged on, I saw more and more eyes drifting in my direction, some cautious, some angry, all focused. Later that night, in the chow hall, it got worse. I'd barely touched my food when I felt the tension swell like a pressure drop in the room. Forks still scraped, conversations still hummed, but everything was suddenly slower, like the whole place had taken a collective step back without moving their feet. That's when I noticed them. 3 of them, sitting near the back wall, all wearing the same dead-eyed look I'd come to associate with people who had nothing left to lose. One of them kept cracking his knuckles without breaking eye contact. Another stirred his cornbread into a paste and never blinked once. The third, smaller than the others but somehow more dangerous for it, just stared, jaw tight, arms loose, like he was waiting to move. Then one of them stood and started walking toward me. The room didn't go silent, but it might as well have. You could feel the attention shift like gravity. He stopped right across the table, rested both hands on the edge of the tray like he owned it, leaned in close. "Funny thing," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Somebody's been talking." Phone turned up after a shake, and the list of names, real short. I didn't answer, not because I was afraid, although I was, but because I genuinely didn't know what he was talking about. I hadn't touched any phones. Hell, I barely had the courage to sneak an extra roll of toilet paper when I ran out. The man kept staring. The other 2 were watching from across the room. Around us, people went through the motions of eating, but no one said a word. "I don't like rats," he said finally, straightening up, "but I like 'em less when they lie." Then he walked away. That night, I didn't sleep. Next day, even worse, eyes everywhere, like the place had grown mirrors I couldn't see. Guys I'd never spoken to started brushing past me too close. No one said anything outright, but I could feel it, like my name had been passed around a room I hadn't entered. I tried to keep calm, tried not to show it, but every step I took felt like walking on glass. The worst moment came during yard call. I just stepped into the open air when I realized nearly a dozen guys were clustered near the back fence, all turned my way, some standing, some crouched low, one pacing with his hands tucked behind his back like he was rehearsing something. I didn't know what was about to happen, but I knew I wasn't walking back from it. And then I heard my name, not from them, from behind me. I turned. Renzo. I hadn't seen him since he'd been transferred weeks earlier, but there he was, shoulders back, eyes clear, walking straight into the space between me and the people watching. He didn't speak to me, didn't even look my way, just raised his hand slightly, barely a gesture, and looked at the men near the fence. "He's clean," he said, like it was already a fact. "He don't talk." Silence. A long pause. And then, one by one, they turned, drifted back to their corners. Nothing loud, nothing messy. Just like that, it was over. Renzo didn't explain, didn't linger. He walked off like he had somewhere more important to be, and just happened to save my life on the way there.